So I'm up on Carlton Hill for the final project of this term, The Hill. We've got fantastic views over the city, and I've produced an ink and chalk drawing on grey paper, and I'm going to be drawing with pieces of card dipped in ink that'll give me some good lines and some tonal shapes. In this example I've then added some chalk, but I'll do some in colour as well. So I've got a little dish of ink so that I can dip my card in, and I'm going to draw, initially I'm going to draw lines probably with the tip of the card, but when I want to get something longer I can slide it up and down. I'll get in the monument first, give me a bit of scale. So I suppose this technique combines the tonal underdrawing that you might get from a charcoal start with the decisiveness of the ink. So between the ink's permanence and the fairly kind of clumsy implement of the piece of card, my drawing is going to be fairly crude but spontaneous, and as I get into it I'll hopefully get bolder, more decisive. But the fact is, whatever I put down is going to be fairly easily modified certainly by some chalk and possibly even by some colour. So it's wonderfully quick. Sometimes has a slight appearance of a woodcut. I think that's maybe because of the kind of angular nature of some of the marks. And because we're up on a hill and we're looking down on the city, I think to be able to put down these horizontal bands of the buildings and not be too worried about perspective is quite useful. Then it's nice to have a bush here and a bit of grass. So that's very quickly done. I could look with my eyes half closed and possibly block in a few more tonal shapes, but I think I'll probably leave that there and it will dry in the Edinburgh sun. So because I'm working on sugar paper, it's drying pretty quickly, it's very absorbent, and I'm just going to draw into it with some white chalk and some charcoal. I could go straight to the charcoal and make all sorts of corrections, but I think it would be more interesting actually to work with the chalk and just look at some of the negative shapes around these structures. And I think by starting with the chalk I may actually do less correcting, less refining, and therefore I might end up with a more interesting drawing. So really most of my chalk goes to the sky. The grey paper serves well for most of the dark and grey shapes in the city. And I think the charcoal will just be if I want to be a bit more distinct about some of these buildings. So some of the church steeples, or the hotel, or the castle, which is a little bit obscured by my monument. And although the ink obviously is permanent, I can put the charcoal on and I can smudge it and get a range of greys in between. So in a way I don't want to do too much really. I want to maintain the immediacy of the ink marks, maybe just get the hills in the distance to add a bit of depth and not do that much to the city. So working with the theme of the hill, it would be great if you could either be on Carlton Hill or find your own hills or your own reference material, and perhaps look at ways of conveying a sense of height, being above the town, looking down, and that may involve choosing your particular perspectives, looking at what comes into view, looking down on rooftops and so on. So I'll leave that as black and white and maybe have a go at one with colour. So I've turned to look in a different direction to get a view over the treetops to the crags and then the distant hills. So if you work with the undiluted ink, I think these bits of card, I've just got pieces of mounting card, and they seem to hold up pretty well, but they will eventually get a bit floppy and you'll have to discard them. But they'll allow you to get a certain amount of simplification as you have to be a bit inventive with the way that you make the marks that you need, but you'll get plenty of spare, maybe unexpected marks, and those are things that can be developed in colour or refined or maybe just hung on to. Now I think I want quieter hills. So to get a feeling of being above the city on the hill and getting all the treetops, and actually there's not that much discernible in the distance here except the occasional steeple, so that's maybe something that I do want to bring out as a sort of feature of the hill. And there's that university building. So I can make a variety of tonal shapes. I can perhaps think a bit about texture as well on dealing with the treetops. And then when that's dry, I can work into it with colour. I'll just get the edge of the hill. So I'm dealing with fairly limited colour, and when I'm not quite sure how much I want, I'm just going to hatch over some areas first. So that's just a bit of chalk to get some light in the sky, and I think I'll hatch over the crags. And of course when you apply these chalk pastels in a hatched way, it allows what's underneath to show through, so that's useful from the point of view of seeing this, the texture created by the ink. Not sure about my greens, may have to mix something, get a bit more yellow into them, but I think it's a good practice when you're working with colour in this way to start with just blocks of colour, try and identify sort of main areas that you want to get established, go from big shapes to gradually smaller areas. So I need something really in the distance. I might actually just go for the charcoal for now, I don't want too much colour. And I think I want to bring out those steeples, so that's maybe something to return to and emphasize. I'm building up the colour, I'm smudging things, I'm putting certain things on more intensely to add a bit more definition, but I'm trying also to leave gaps so that what's underneath in terms of the ink marks can still have some impact on the final drawing.
Ja tam jeszcze wejdę, to mi tam zrobisz, nie? Ja będę trzymał ten puchar, czy co tam jest.
And one more approach that you might try would be to put down some colour shapes first with the side of the pastel and then draw the ink into it, which will be quite interesting because the pastels are pretty absorbent and will take the ink in an interesting way. So just a few colours to represent some of those main areas. Just purple ones. I'll mix a bit of charcoal in as well. Colour shapes first and then ink marks second. And as ever, when you work with this in this kind of order, not least because as I've said, the chalk is so absorbent, the ink doesn't flow quite so quickly. But when you work in this order, you often tend to define much less, so it can produce a much stronger piece of work because you've had to be much more selective about what you do develop and define. But because of the unruly nature of the ink, there'll also be some refining to do with more pastel or even with some charcoal. But that's a really satisfying way to do it, actually. So I'll just let that dry. I haven't done so much with this one, but I'll let that dry just long enough to show you what another layer of chalk might do. So doing things this way around, I think the charcoal is very useful for actually bringing together the intense dark of the ink marks with the colour, because the colour is looking a little bit primary and unmixed. So I think the charcoal helps with that. And then putting the pastel on in a more intense way, using the tip of the pastel, is going to bring out more definition to whatever it is that I want to draw attention to. That should be above the hill. Should be quite nice. I'll bring out that cathedral. So that would be another way of approaching it. To put the colour down first and then work into that with the ink, and then really come and go with the charcoal and the chalk marks. So I hope that's useful, and that's going to generate some images of this hill or a hill.